Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link and in association with Consider Solutions. Today, we're looking at the root causes of RPA successes and failures. My name is Susie West, and I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link. I'm very pleased to be presenting and introducing our guest speaker for today. He's a great friend of Shared Services Link, Dan French, who is the CEO of Consider Solutions, and very much a recognised expert in this area. So let's touch on context for a moment. Many of you on the line today will have already implemented a number of robots. Some of you are in pilot, and some of you are very much in the kind of the evaluation process, and then some of you are really just in the exploratory process. So we're really at a stage where now RPA has caught our imagination. And most of us realise now that this is going to be a significant part of our future in the world of finance transaction processing. So it's a methodology that has got a lot of heat underneath it. In the last 3 years in particular, RPA adoption has surged. I think that's a very accurate word to describe the momentum there. At Shared Services Link, we've done a number of studies, and just over 3 years ago, so let's say 36 months ago, adoption levels were in the single percentage. 12 months after that, they were at around 25%. 12 months after that, so that was last year, they were at around 42, 43%, and that was reflective of the European and the North American markets, which pretty much just a couple of percentage points between the two geographies. What we're anticipating is that in the next 12 months, we'll be looking at adoption levels that are probably around the high 50s and low 60s in terms of percentage. And when we pull these responses, we are looking at those who are piloting and those who are just have a single process with RPA applied to it, or those who have multiple processes. What we're going to be studying today is really what you need to be applying as far as critical success factors to make sure that your RPA program takes flight and that you are applying the best practices. And we are still in that phase where we're figuring out what the best practices are, because it is nascent. Even though it's moving at such a clip, it's still very much nascent for us as a market. So what we're going to be examining here is how can you get to a situation where you have hundreds of robots, maybe thousands of robots in place, versus maybe having 2 or 3 that are floundering, but also making sure that you're putting robots in where they need to be put in, because we also do know as well that RPA is great for us in shared services, but it's not necessarily the silver bullet. So having clarity over the role of RPA and the purpose it actually serves. And also, let's not forget what's coming down the turnpike directly afterwards, and that is the exciting proposition of artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive thinking. And we're all very much focused on RPA right now. That some of us aren't really looking beyond that, and we really should be, because that is a very exciting phase for global business services and shared services. So let's hand over to Dan, and he can walk us through his thinking. Over to you, please, Dan French.
Thank you, Susie. Good welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. So here's the session we're going to be talking through. So Susie has set the scene a little bit. I want to talk about where we are with RPA, adding a little bit to what Susie said, and really break through some of the hype and focus on the reality. Now, many of you will have experienced breaking through that already. Some of you will be looking to do so. I want to look at some of the challenges on the road to intelligent automation of all sorts, and how do we drive sustainable process improvement, which is what we're here to do. And then what are the critical factors for success, and then I'll summarize. My context here is that I run a firm called Consider Solutions. We focus on what we call world-class finance, which is helping the organization drive better business results, reduce the cost of operations, obviously, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And on the right-hand side, you see some pillars and a platform. And the pillar we're really talking about today is financial process optimization. And when I say finance, it isn't actually just core finance. We're talking obviously in many areas across shared services and across the business. So I'm focusing very much on that right-hand pillar. So we've got some global influences, the clients we work with, very large companies around the world, and we're lucky to have them as clients, but also they give us a lot of insight and they challenge us a lot. So a lot of the thinking I'm sharing here comes from these folks and others, and many of you will be on this call. So thank you. So setting the scene, where are we? We're going to start off with a poll question. So, Susie, would you like to lead us off with that?
I certainly would. Thank you very much. So the first poll question, let's find out where you are with RPA today. Are you researching, exploring this as a topic? Are you in the pilot phase? Beyond pilot, you've done the pilot, that's behind you, now you're in rollout phase. Or maybe you're expanding your initial implementation and you're growing your robots or your number of processes from maybe dozens out to maybe the hundreds, possibly even the thousands. So interesting results. We have 42% who are in the exploratory / evaluating phase, 38% of you are in the pilot phase, 11% in rollout, and 9% of you are in the expansion phase. Back to you, please, Dan.
Great, thank you. That's very useful. So 20% of you are already have already addressed the issues, the challenges that might cause you to fail to scale. So that's good. The other 80% are probably hoping to find that out. So thanks for that. There are shifting sands of the world we're in, and I talk about world-class finance and also in procurement. I think this applies as well because of the impact. But if you look at this is a KPMG study, but if you just think about where we're coming from, we spent an awful lot of time in recent years focused on control, but also a lot of time driving down the cost of operations with shared services, ERP and the like, and outsourcing. And if you look at the right-hand side, the real focus now is on, we've optimized financial operations, we've optimized controls, but really focusing now on performance, both value and risk. And performance is obviously about efficiency, but it's about a few other things as well. But I think it's interesting to see that context. Now, from a business focus, it's pretty clear that every organization is challenged with the same priorities. Many of these are very obvious. I think the one I would like to touch on a bit more is this idea of revenue growth. All organizations seek to drive revenue growth, but there's definitely something unusual going on now, and what I call the Uberization of business, where more and more organizations and many of the big companies we deal with are not just driving more revenue from existing products and not just innovating products, they're changing the very models by which they operate. So large automotive manufacturers are moving from a world where they were selling or still are selling products to us as individuals to a world where they will be actually just selling us a service. The big retail organizations want to get more intimate with their customers. So the Uberization piece for me is this idea of perhaps not having a car, but having a relationship with a service provider that provides a transportation service, but has a much more intimate knowledge of your behavior and how you operate than the original product provider. Now that drives a massive challenge all the way through the organization into finance and procurement as well. And obviously all the other pieces of driving down operating costs, re-engineering processes are very central to that as well. But you then look at shared services, which I know most of us are here represent or involved in. The shared services imperative. Within that context, shared services are trying to streamline some core processes. And the original focus was very much about efficiency of transaction processing. But the imperative now is very much to look beyond the shared service center and have efficiency within the process, but effectiveness right across the organization, which is what's given rise to this idea of global process ownership and having really a way of optimizing both for efficiency and effectiveness our global processes. And we've got to think about technology in that context. And obviously, there's the challenge to embrace the new technologies. The idea that we've had analytics has been on the agenda for the shared services business case since day one, but we haven't really embraced it properly. And there's a talent question. So obviously the key imperatives there are about process, technology, insight, and talent. And I think those are things worth thinking about. If we look at some recent surveys, HFS Research have done an interesting survey here with executives about the level of focus and investment in new technologies. Now, you can question this about what a significant investment focus actually means because it's not defined, but RPA is right up at the top and you've got a whole list of technological excitement there. Okay, so that gives us some reinforcement that, as Susie says, things are definitely happening in the RPA world. If you look at perhaps the focus on what organizations need to do from KPMG, the 2018 organizational imperatives here, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, they're pretty obvious, but half of those are all about optimizing processes and essentially about the enablement of RPA. Interestingly, number 10 is about bringing outsourced work back in-house as the labor arbitrage equation becomes confused, to say the least, if not somewhat diminished by RPA. So everyone is telling us this is where we've got to go, but I think we all know there's a danger in all of this. We've all been here before. you can't attend a session or read any piece of news without being bombarded with what robotics, RPA, AI, machine learning, cognitive this, augmented that. And we're definitely in a kind of a frothy market of hype right now. So it's critically important for us to understand exactly what these things mean and where they apply to us. So it is important to start with a what is RPA. I'm sure you all know what it is, but I've never ceased to be challenged by folks in sessions where they say, can you just tell us exactly what it is? I've heard about it, but please define it. So we're talking about pieces of software that automate and integrate high volume repeatable tasks. We used to call this application integration. RPA is a much more catchy term, and obviously the robotics piece is part of the thing that captures the imagination. But what we're talking about is integrating and automating repetitive tasks. And there's various phrases being used. And again, you've got to separate a bit the marketing from reality. But the reality is we're talking about rules-based automation, tasks which have a clear set of rules, and we want to automate those and replace individuals, or replace the boring work that individuals do so they can release them for more useful activities. But be very careful about the claims that RPA is also artificial intelligence, because it's not, and for good reason, not least because artificial intelligence tends to operate as a black box. And for the sort of tasks we're applying RPA to, we need these to be auditable. We need to be able to say what good looks like. We need to know the steps we went through. So particularly when we're committing items to our financial statements at any end of the process, you've got to be able to say that happened according to a set of rules. So just a little word of caution there about AI in the context of RPA. We know what the strategy is about. We want to drive down operating costs and decrease cycle times. And what does RPA software apply to? That kind of makes fairly obvious sense. And it's all part of the simplification standardization agenda. And I think it's important we look at it in that context, because that drives a lot of what we're trying to do. So the voice of experience in terms of buzzwords and reality. There are two great quotes here. Steve Gordon of BD, Becton Dickinson, who was one of the early pioneers in RPA, was somewhat frustrated with his early experiences that the whole organization got so excited about RPA, they wanted to solve every problem with RPA. So if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it was one of those situations. So he came up with this lovely quote that RPA is about fixing the potholes in the road. Do not confuse it with building a new highway. You wouldn't want to. It's the wrong tool for that, which relates to Sanjay's comment at Genpact, which is don't trade the entire toolbox for one screwdriver. I think they're very simple things, but they stick in my mind because they reflect a lot of insight, even though they're kind of amusing little quotes. Innovation. What are smart finance, smart procurement leaders doing? This is the FSN latest research. And I think this is interesting as well. Innovation's got an interesting reputation. Every one of our organizations, innovation is in our mission statements. You're told that the company's innovative, all this stuff. But actually, a lot of organizations are actually quite conservative and don't like to innovate. So it's good that the smart finance leaders are signing up, and they're signing up for these three reasons, which is quite reasonable. What's most interesting about this survey is the way that different executives see what innovation is. And we want to think about this also when we apply RPA. 1 in 5 see innovation as the implementation of a new ERP system or major chunk of technology. A much larger percentage see it as relatively small steps in automation and integration. Now that is exactly what RPA is. That 35% is small steps, automation, integration, rather than wholesale change. And 19% see it's about analytical applications deliver better insight. So when talking to our leaders, we've got to understand when they're talking about innovation, what they're expecting, as well as what we're planning to do. So that's worth thinking about. So hype and reality. There is a lovely chart which is so much full of truth that it's worth playing. So here's another KPMG result from their 2018 survey. So it's a lovely quote at the top, but what they're actually saying is get ready to be disappointed. A big gap will remain between expectations and readiness. That's consulting speak if you've ever heard it. So get ready to be disappointed. And the reason we should get ready to be disappointed is this classic hype cycle, the peak of frothy expectations, the collapse into the trough of disillusionment as you realize all of your dreams weren't going to be met, and the struggle up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. Now, I see the role of this kind of webcast and this kind of discussion to help try and take the top off that inflated expectations and give us a straighter line, perhaps, to productivity. So we've got another question for you. Susie, would you do the honors, please?
Certainly would. Coming up on your screen now, we want to find out what processes you are currently applying RPA to. Is it P2P? Is it order to cash? Is it record to report? Is it multiple, i.e. 2 or 3 of the above? Or maybe you are undecided right now. We have 63% of you saying multiple. And that's followed in a slightly poor second place with those people just focusing on the single processes. So 14% of you focusing just on P2P, 9% of you focusing just on order to cash, customer to cash, 7% of you just on R2R or general accounting, and 7% of you are undecided. So interesting results. Back to you, please.
Yeah, that's useful. And it's good to see so many people are on multiple processes. RPA pilot activity. So many of you are involved in pilots right now. This is a Hacker Group survey. So they're saying right now, and this is very recent, they're saying 58% of finance organizations are piloting RPA, which is a pretty healthy state. And you look, HR is not doing too badly, procurement's doing reasonably well, and global business services also doing pretty well. And you'd expect GBS and shared services to do well because of the standardization agenda inherent. So that's kind of good news. I think the same survey kind of had a slight pause for thought, because mainstream adoption has largely yet to happen. So you've got to separate a little bit, vendor claims that everybody's doing it from the reality. And I'm always reminded a little bit of, I've got to be careful how I say this, but if you recall your teenage years, there were a lot of nefarious activities that you got up to, or you thought about getting up to. And there's a kind of phrase that everybody's talking about it, very few people are doing it, and nobody's doing it very well, does come to mind with this projection. So the projections over 3 years are very substantial, but in terms of right now, and this is across the known world, limited adoption is the primary status, and even that is generally in the minority. So pause for thought. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the good things, the bad things, and the insights about RPA. Now, we should all know this. This is the good stuff. This is what you see on the advertising. Big percentage efficiency gains to be had. We've got reduced cycle times for any tasks that involve that are currently integrated by humans, so taking data from one system into another. Great news that bots don't get bored, tired, or lose concentration. And that does lead to the reduction in data entry transposition errors. And consistent task execution is an important part of process standardization, because once you can get the task execution standardized, you can start to help the overall process. So auditability can be good if it's a compliance-related task. The rapid implementation, ease of development piece. There's a big argument that taking the frustrating tasks away from valuable people is a benefit to everybody, and refocusing talent on higher value work and making the workplace more appealing to hire into. So all that's good stuff and what we'd expect. So let's move on, because we know that. What I call bot kicking is more about where the real world experience comes back to say it isn't quite as sunny as it's painted. There's a number of big issues around oversight and governance. There's bots sitting, as in bots in operation. How do we know they're working? What do we do when they're not? And who's looking after them? And there's lots of independent advice that says for every 10 bots, you need 1 human to oversight. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. But you definitely need a process to govern the operation of bots, because they're not going to tell you when things aren't going well. And the development process also needs governance and control. And again, sometimes the desire for rapid implementation allows us to forget that, and it can come at a cost if you don't do that. Now, the no judgment and following rules is all very good, but there's a lot of evidence that if the bot rules are not really well designed and monitored, that a bot can repeat errors at a scale you really don't want to think about. And that causes a lot of clogging of the organizational arteries. So there are many, many cases where early adopters have said, I wish I'd spent more time looking at the real rules behind this task. I've talked about rules-based automation and not AI. This need to have detailed task level, desk level standard operating procedures, that is critical. If you don't have it, you should think very carefully about applying RPA, unless you can design and build those quickly. And a lovely quote from Walmart, which again is one of these things that sticks in your head. It's all very good when things go well, but automation makes bad worse faster. Have to be careful we put the comma in that. But so if you've got something bad and you try to apply RPA to it, it's going to be a lot worse, a lot quicker than you might expect. And I think the other comment, well, it's very important actually in communicating in the business case and to executives. The higher the percentage productivity benefit claimed by your vendor, the smaller the task they're referring to. So when somebody says, I've got a 300% or 500% productivity improvement in an activity, the implication is it's a very small task, because we know in substantial tasks, productivity benefits are much smaller than that. So scaling RPA benefits from the task to the process is challenging, not just in practice, but in expectation. If you set the expectation, you're going to have many 100% of productivity benefit. You'll struggle to deliver that at a scale that management will appreciate. So what do we learn? What do we observe and learn from that? And again, from the people who've been before you, talked about the potholes in the road. It is also important to realize it's just another tool in a toolbox. It doesn't replace all the traditional stuff we've done. ERP has a place, other things have a place, the process suites have a place. But again, once you've applied RPA to a task, people have commented to say, you know what, we didn't really need to do that. We should just eliminated the task. There's a reason it was poor. We should have got rid of it. And this idea about the task, we've got to think not just about driving task improvement, but about the overall end-to-end process. Because at the end of the day, a massive improvement in a data transposition task might have a minor improvement in an overall end-to-end process. There's a lot of experience and evidence that even because it's so easy to develop with the RPA tools of today, it's easy just to go it alone and code and go. But engaging IT, information security and audit, to name but three, do that very, very early, because those issues will come to pass later on. And if you haven't got them engaged early, you will not scale. You probably won't even deploy your bots. Team structure and placement, where are you actually putting the RPA team? Is it in shared services? Is it in finance or procurement? Is it in IT? Wherever you put it, it's got a cross-functional set of skills. And the issue for understanding, simplifying, harmonizing, and standardization doesn't go away. You've got to do that. And most people argue you want to do that before you RPA. And garbage in, garbage out, it's always been the same. And one of the great things about speed of delivery is you get the efficiency. One of the bad things is it sometimes lulls you into false sense of security. You don't think about garbage in, garbage out. So that's some feedback. We have yet another question for you. So, Susie?
Great, thank you very much, Dan. How many tasks have you successfully applied RPA to? None yet, we're in progress. 1, 2 to 10, or more than 10. So let's have a look at those results. Not really surprising, given the results of the first poll. 34% of you saying none yet. 22% sounds like you're kind of designing that right now. 17% of you say 1. 19% of you say 2 to 10, and 8% are applying RPA to more than 10 tasks. Back to you, please, Dan.
That's fascinating. It's kind of right down the middle for those of you who are in the early stage through to those who have got production and productive capabilities. That's great. Thanks. So let's talk now about challenges on the road to smarter automation. Some of these observations, these are quotes directly from clients and folks we work with. So I think some of these are great. These are just the ones I think are kind of memorable. A couple of points here. ERP, this top quote I just find interesting, and it resonates around a lot of other things as well, but there's a lack of center of gravity around the ERP. And that's probably good. We probably had too big a sense of center of gravity 5 to 10 years ago. So long as there's a balance. There's a danger, however, that people will do anything that isn't RPA. We talked about the need for extremely well-documented keystroke level procedures. And this idea of repetitive, routine, rules-based. If it isn't one of those, don't do it. A repetitive or common refrain is, I wish we'd understood the impact on risk and controls earlier. The obvious one is segregation duties. Now, there is no, just to set your mind at ease, we're not talking about segregating duties between bot A and bot B, because segregation duties is about addressing the human frailties of conflicts of interest. So the bigger issue is, if you've got a segregation duties in a process, and typically between two tasks that represent key elements of that conflict of interest, if one of those tasks you're going to automate with RPA, you're going to have to move that part of the conflict of interest check. So it's not about saying whether the RPA bot itself is subject to segregation duties, but it's a process you want to think about. So that's one of the reasons you want to get audit involved early, or your internal controls folks, and think about what's the purpose of segregation duties and how do you apply it to the process. The last two comments are interesting, and these are very recent statistics. 38% of RPA implementations fail to achieve expected benefits. That's probably because people are over pushing the many hundreds of % productivity improvement, and management buy into that and then realize it's not quite all like that. So that's kind of a word of warning for those of you building business cases. What I do think is very interesting about the future of shared services and business process outsourcing is nearly a third of people are saying their use of RPA is going to impact their decision to renew the BPO contracts. Not necessarily to not do it, but they might demand that RPA is part of the BPO contract. And I might demand that the productivity benefits are part of the BPO contract, which of course might make the BPO contract commercially non-viable. So they're very, very good. Now, culture and change, this is in any technology big issue. I'm thinking of a phrase that has Sherlock in it. 80% of executives, when surveyed, are very positive about robotics and RPA. Only 17% of transactional workers are positive about it. Surprise, surprise. Part of this is all down to the fact that we are allowing ourselves to be diverted by this idea of robots taking over the workforce and everyone's jobs at risk. We're not really communicating very clearly the realities of the outcome we're looking for, and we are probably guilty of giving a little bit of science fiction to the story. So it's no surprise at all that there's a massive difference between executives and people doing the work. Now, the problem with that is there is a lot of evidence also that individuals in the workforce are kind of sabotaging bots, not maliciously perhaps, or maybe they are, but because they think, oh, I think we could do that better. That's not the way it's meant to happen. And it's a big challenge both for culture and change management. So I think there's lessons there for building a plan, for educating, and for your business case. Only 17% of those surveyed saw RPA impact in talent management, which I think is interesting. I wonder what the other 83% are doing. But a great quote also, which is worth thinking about. Avoid confusion is not robotic process automation, it's robotic task automation. And if you explain that to the executives, and with your case studies and your examples and the value you're going to drive, it's a bit clearer to everybody what you're trying to achieve, because we're not taking end-to-end processes and roboticizing them. The technology doesn't do that. So these are good things. So if you want a little hint about something to help change management, driving attention, interest, and support, is a bit of bot naming. Here's what Tarmac have done, and they've got some interesting names. Obviously, you can see what TV series they watch, but that's kind of an interesting idea. Fail to scale is a big issue. RPA as a technology does what it's meant to do. It may be slightly over-egged, but the challenge is how do we scale up the benefits? And this is kind of the list of the critical things that seem to be impacting organizations' ability to scale with RPA. So understanding the end-to-end business process is okay taking a task where we can eliminate a spreadsheet and eliminate this, that, and the other. But it's how do we optimize, or how do we drive maximum value for the end-to-end business process? How do we choose the right RPA target tasks to automate? That's a business analysis question. But that's pretty important, because I've spoken to people who are looking at RPA target tasks. And for example, they say, oh, we're going to apply RPA to general ledger reconciliations. We're going to do that, and we're going to build some bots. We're going to look at the detailed task analysis. And you think to yourself, well, actually, reconciliations have been automated by some pretty powerful augmenting technologies for ERP already. And they're tried and tested. They're good value for money. Why would you try and build that from scratch? So kind of interesting to make sure that you're not just trying to find, where do I use my hammer? Is it the best place for this hammer, or should I be using another tool? Technical knowledge, talent, and skills, it's tricky to get hold of, can be expensive. How do you build that pool? And it's not just how to use the tool, it's the whole issue of design. And if you don't build reusable designs and templates, the evidence is that your scaling slows dramatically. We've talked about governance of bots. How are we going to govern the bots both operationally and in development? The issue of data. So if you've got automated rules-based processing in your RPA bot, then you want to be sure that the input data and master data has got reasonable quality prior to RPA. And that has caused some of the exponential errors we talked about earlier. So it's worth looking at these things in parallel. Bot rules, we talked about how important it is to have absolutely fine-grained desk operating instructions, not just for the way it should happen, but what you do in exception conditions when the data isn't quite what you expect. What organization implications, how are we going to build an organization to do RPA at scale? You need a center of excellence, center of expertise. Where does it sit? What's involved in it? Who needs to be there? What sort of skills do we need? And then as we apply the bots themselves, what's the organizational impact? We've talked about some of the change issues, but does it change roles? It certainly changes what people are doing. Does it change the sort of talent we need? What's the acceptance? How are we going to drive acceptance from the people participating in the process? The people who we're trying to augment with RPA, we're going to expect more from them. And on the IT side, there's much is made of, the code and go idea of RPA, but you've got to consider the impact of upgrades, maintenance, and changes to source systems. So anything that connects to a system, whether it's an ERP or another system or even a spreadsheet, when somebody puts a piece of change into the ERP or into the spreadsheet, everything goes haywire. So you've got to understand both the impact of it and how to manage it. So the reduced dependency on IT is a misleading view. And then there is that issue about expectations we've talked about, but also the risk of future legacy. What we're doing at RPA today, in 5 years' time, what are we going to do with it? And it's just worth thinking about. Are we going to develop and nurture these things, or are we going to replace? There's a big focus on understanding the process first. That's a clear lesson that comes out. Standardization, how do we build the rules? We all know what should happen in our processes, or it's quite easy to find out. It's less easy to know what actually does happen. And generally speaking, even process experts are not fully aware of what's actually going on in the outliers of the process. So that's kind of something that we need to know. We need to understand that. Robotic task automation, the big prize. So there's absolutely no doubt that we can get with RPA positive change at a fraction of the cost of classic approaches. So we should embrace it, but we've got to be very careful about some things. Trying to understand the end-to-end process versus just task optimization. This perception of low-cost simplicity, frankly, the whole process isn't as low cost as we might be led to believe, and you've got to build that into your business case, all the things I've talked about. Governance challenge, performance improvement at scale, and you've got to be prepared to surf the waves of change, because what's RPA today, in 3 years' time, there'll be other technologies or emerging technologies that say, let's use that now. So how are we going to deal with those waves? So technology can help, but are we going to see a driverless shared service center anytime soon? Not in my lifetime or yours. Technology is powerful, but it's not effective alone. We've always known this, right? We've always known that technology alone doesn't solve the problem, but we kind of get caught up in it every time round. So let's talk about how we drive sustainable process improvement. There is a delicate balance, we all know. So I remember one of the first jobs I ever had, a very important lesson I was given is, you might think you haven't got time to do it right, but you've always got time to do it again. And as a young guy, I thought, oh, really? I'll just get it done quickly. But there is this balance of our need for productivity. How do we balance the productivity execution part of it with how do I make sure I'm doing the right things? This is really efficiency versus effectiveness. So how do I know where the lowest hanging fruit is? So for example, if I'm looking at a purchase to pay process, I need a way of working out, is my issue in the take-on vendor management process? Is it in our purchase order process? Is it in invoice management, or is it in payment? And we're going to need to find a way of getting that insight quickly. We need to work out where our performance gaps are. So we need an analysis of our process to be able to say, based on data, where are the gaps? For example, in this case, at a quick look, you might say average number of invoices processed per FTA per month. That's pretty low compared to a benchmark of about 1,300. So we need to start digging into that and find out what's causing that. Percentage of invoices paid on time doesn't sound great to me because you've got late payment and all the rest of it. And where are the process exceptions? So here are purchase orders, for example, without purchase requests, quarter of them. That's clearly not supporting the process we set out. We need to work out what's causing it, and let's fix that. And maybe RPA is a solution, but let's find the problem first. Where are the process cycle variations, both in terms of the end-to-end process and also the outliers? Where are the very, very short cycle times and where are very long cycle times? Short cycle times will typically indicate potential control problems, and long cycle times in a P2P world might indicate supplier challenges. So if you're going to do this, you want to try and have some smart analytics to give you some insight. So based on some of the work we've been doing, here's some interesting little factoids or stats. In some of the companies we're working with, up to 76% of the purchase orders are created by some form of RPA. Sounds great. But what we're also finding, and not just for POs, but of things created automatically by RPA, there's a significant percentage of them which are subsequently deleted or unused or marked for or just parked. And that's not good. There's some clogging in the arteries that we need to understand. We still have a big problem with master data. That becomes much more painful when you move to RPA because humans can kind of make some judgments. Maybe RPA can't. We've still got a high degree of duplication coming through. I mean, 0.5% still seems a ridiculously high percentage to me. And you can go down through here. So we've got some interesting insights into where the problems might be. I mean, right at the bottom there, surprisingly improperly segregated duties. So companies who have a very strong internal control compliance program, when you actually look at the real data, there's still a surprisingly high number of segregation duty exceptions in practice. So let's have a final poll question.
We would like to know, what is the primary method that you use to identify the areas for process improvement? Is it a requirements workshop, discussion with process stakeholders, industry standard KPIs and benchmarks that you may have access to and use, internal audit, relevant case studies, or is it process analytics? So a clear winner here, it's the slightly more of the classic requirements workshop, with 74% of you saying that you use that as your primary method. Workshop, discussion with process stakeholders, followed in second place at 38% of you, process analytics, third place, internal audit, and joint fourth place, industry standard KPIs and benchmarks and relevant case studies. Back to you, please, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Susie. There's some interesting, there's a whole bunch of comments I can make on that, but definitely a good idea to combine the analytics with the other techniques. I'm involved in quite a number of programs and projects where the workshops are very interesting, but the participants, while subject matter experts, might not actually understand how the process is executing today, hence the analytics. So we do know automation is key, but data is key as well. So I think there used to be an old adage that every process improvement should focus on people, process, and technology. And obviously the technology we're talking about today is RPA. I think we've got to be really, really clear that data and using data in a timely manner and in an insightful manner is now a critical way of us driving the value we need. Let's come now to lessons learned. What are the key critical success factors? I've got 3 for you, bringing together all of the experience that's come through. First one, selecting the right target for RPA, without a doubt. So analyze the end-to-end process. I talked about identifying these process performance gaps using analytics. Decompose the end-to-end process to identify tasks and the RPA-friendly ones. RPA-friendly tasks look like that. But bear in mind, my comment also is RPA the right solution to the problem? I mentioned the R2R example, and advise the organization to actually possibly look at stuff off the shelf that solves the problem. Selecting the right target for RPA is great, but how do we select the right target for that? And in a purchase to pay example, you can see here the end-to-end process from demand, sourcing, contracting, ordering, fulfillment, settlement, which is really source to pay. So you've got this end-to-end process, and for some of you, the end-to-end process might really be invoice to pay. Some of you might be the whole cycle. But there are some examples. You identify these manual, repetitive, routine, rules-based tasks. Here's some examples. But that's what you've got to do. You've got to look at the end-to-end process. You've got to have a conversation about the value of the end-to-end process, decompose it to the tasks, and find those ones that are RPA friendly, if you like. Second critical factor for RPA success is planning the journey. It's really about a plan and a process. The classic things you need to implement any new process and new change. So engaging the right stakeholders and agreeing what outcomes you expect and are aiming for. Identify realistic measures of success. Building a team with the eye to the future, not just what I need today. What's the operating model? Am I going to be central, local, remote in the use of RPA? Do I let every organization use it? Do we centralize it? What's the right tool for the use case? Have we a linear task automation? Have we got some task orchestration? Have we got some deep ERP integration? Work out how you're going to get and develop the skills and decide your rollout, business value, iteration piece. How's that going to work? No surprises, it's a human challenge, a change challenge, but it applies to RPA as much as any other technology change. So one way of looking at that is this kind of classic process for any process change. We tend to use this one. This basically puts into a pentagon those topics I've already talked about, from defining outcomes, engaging stakeholders, and so on. What's important is only 1 in 9 of those topics is about technology, and we have to always bear that in mind. So the third critical success factor for scaling is building the RPA center of excellence, because you can't scale without having some center of gravity around it. So this RPA center of excellence needs to own the RPA strategy and process, needs to clearly identify the roles and responsibility within the COE and beyond, relationship management for people you're RPAing for, have a level of business process knowledge and business analysis skills that allows you to be effective and allows you to select the right tasks, to have some ability to do some kind of RPA readiness assessment for your internal customers, change management governance, we've talked about that, audit readiness, risk and control, got to be ready for all this. And then you've got the tool skills and reusable components. But again, it's one small part. And this whole thing about the interoperability with IT, there's got to be some early warning system about system incident planning, system incident response. How do you deal with that from an RPA point of view? What really those 3 CSFs apply to is remembering that although RPA is about driving some great speed down the tasks, these task tunnels on the left-hand side, really from a business point of view, we've got to balance our time, investment, priorities, not just at the task on the left, but moving higher up. And this kind of visual I find helpful about this kind of 30,000-foot view. On the right-hand side, I can see the whole picture, see the whole process. On the left-hand side, I can only see my task. On the left-hand side, I can't actually see whether this task actually goes anywhere. So that comes back to that point. So we do need to understand the role of technology, and there's a lot of talk about the future of automation. I just think it's worth laying this out. Interesting way of looking at kind of the processes or the elements of the process we do. There's the transactional work, the knowledge work, and decision work. And there's the sequence and execute stuff, and the sense, we gather and evaluate stuff. And these are some of the techniques and technologies that fit around there. But you'll see now a build about where does technology take us. So the piece about automation on the left-hand side, that arrow from transactional work to decision work, is really what RPA is giving us. It's giving us that connection and give us an automation layer there. But there's other automation layers that take us from transactional work and the data from transactional work into knowledge work through AI technologies and the use of AI to augment human work to help us into decisions. And I think the general acceptance, this is where technology is going. And the only reason I share this is just beware of people who tell you just put it all in one bucket, all of the emerging technologies are the same kind of thing. They solve different problems. You want to work out where they fit in your business and in your processes. So if you were to say the key platforms for success for the end-to-end process, RPA is important, but understand where it fits. The system of record, the ERP, isn't going away soon. It might be less centric, but it's critical to success. Having that working where it should and working appropriately. There's augmented process suites in all of the process cycles. So in P2P, it's kind of the Arebas and the Coopers, the supplier management applications. In R2R, things like Blackline, and oversee it's kind of the sales and marketing applications. Those are important, and those are tried and tested. Then you've got task automation, task integration, which is RPA plus. So it's not just RPA. Just because it doesn't have an RPA label doesn't mean it won't solve the problem, but RPA is a repeatable process. Performance management is about, if you think about the previous chart, is about how to get insight into what I'm doing, and that's kind of AI plus. And of course, you can't do any of this without end-to-end process ownership and governance, without the role of the global process owner. So one final comment about an example of action and insight and balance. This came from a discussion I had with BP last year. When they put a purchase to pay improvement process together, they initially were very focused on P2P efficiency. So obviously, how do we automate and streamline stuff? And the more they dug into the process and they realized the value of improving the process, the P2P efficiency piece was a very small part. It was about 5% in that pie chart. The massive value was releasing the savings from effective contract compliance. So making sure that we're actually driving contracts and orders and payments based on the terms we've negotiated rather than letting them leak away at the point of purchase and bringing spend under control. So it's important to remember efficiency isn't the only game in town, which is why action and insight are equally important. So just do it. I think we've all been guilty of it. I have been. It does create unintended consequences. That's what I look like when I've had the unintended consequences. But when action and insight are in harmony, I have a slightly happier monkey, which doesn't look anything like me, but I think it's amusing. Summary and recap. We've talked through this agenda. We have looked at where we are with the RPA. We looked at hype and reality. I hope you found that useful. We looked at challenges on the road. We looked at critical success factors. What do we have to do to drive process improvement? Hopefully you've got some insight of that. We've talked about how that will work. I think it's worth having a healthy caution for Greeks bearing gifts, which I think refers to the wooden horse of Troy. It's a little cartoon here, which I just think reflects some of what I hear, certainly at conferences and occasionally in meetings with executives having a conversation with the latest advisor. And it's probably worth using that in your business case presentation. And that, as they say, is that.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. That was incredibly useful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and attention today. We look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.